The room went silent the moment he walked in. Not because of the men standing against the walls, 6 of them, positioned with the particular stillness of people who had learned that stillness itself was a language. Not because of the cold that lived in the upper floors of this building regardless of season, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Not because of Kim Tae-sung himself, sitting behind his desk with the unhurried stillness of a man who had not been surprised by anything in over a decade. The room went silent because of the boy. 19 years old. A charcoal wool coat over a fitted black turtleneck, dark trousers, clean shoes. No escort. No appointment. No visible anxiety in his face or his hands or the way he moved through the door, like the distance between himself and the most feared man in Seoul was a formality he intended to resolve quickly. He stopped 3 feet from the desk, close enough to be deliberate, far enough to show he understood exactly what he was doing. Tae-sung looked up from the document he had been reading. He did not look up quickly. He finished the sentence he was on, set the paper down with one measured motion, and then looked at the boy standing in front of him with the expression of a man who was deciding, without urgency, how he felt about this. The 6 men against the walls had not moved. They were waiting for a signal. No signal came. "Who?" Tae-sung said, his voice the texture of something that had been very still for a very long time. "Let a boy into my building?" Nobody answered. Because nobody had let him in. He had simply walked through. "My name is Haneul," the boy said. "Cece Davis is my mother." He did not shift his weight. Did not look at the men against the walls. His eyes stayed on Tae-sung with a directness that was not aggression. It was something more unsettling than aggression. It was complete calm. "Someone has been moving against her company using your name. I need you to understand something before this goes any further." Tae-sung looked at him for a long moment. On his desk, a cup of tea sat half-finished and cold. The only thing in the room that suggested any version of ordinary life existed here. "And what," Tae-sung said, "is that?" Haneul looked at him with eyes that carried no fear. Not the suppressed kind. Not the managed kind. Simply none. "You picked the wrong family," he said. The room held its breath. Kim Tae-sung leaned back in his chair very slowly. He looked at this boy. This 19-year-old who had walked through 6 checkpoints and 3 corridors, and had arrived at the desk of the most feared man in Seoul, and delivered those 4 words with the confidence of someone who had already calculated every possible response and found none of them concerning. And then for the first time in 11 years, Kim Tae-sung did something that made every man in the room adjust their understanding of what this meeting was. He said, "Sit down, Haneul." Not an order. Not a threat. An invitation. Welcome to Black Silk Stories, the home of Afro-Korean stories that hit different. Subscribe, drop a comment, and do not go anywhere. This is only the beginning. 40 minutes earlier, Haneul had been in Maya's car. She was driving. He was in the passenger seat in his charcoal coat, his phone in his hand, the screen showing 3 documents he had been building for 72 hours without sleeping properly. Outside, Seoul moved past the windows in its usual state of magnificent indifference. The city that did not stop for anything, including the quiet war currently being conducted against his mother's company from the inside. "You don't have to go in alone," Maya said. She was in a structured burgundy blazer over a black silk blouse, her locks pulled back, her eyes on the road with the focus of someone running 3 parallel thoughts simultaneously. "I can come with you." "No. Haneul." "Maya." He looked at her. "If this goes wrong, I need you outside. I need you on the phone to Shin, to the filing court, to every contact we've built in the last 6 months. I need you operational." He paused. "You're more dangerous out here than you are in that room." She drove in silence for a moment. "And if it doesn't go wrong? Then I'll be back in an hour and you can tell me I should have let you come." "I'm going to say that regardless," she said. "I know." She pulled up half a block from the building, a tower of dark glass and clean lines in Gangnam, the kind of building that announced nothing about what happened inside it, which was exactly the point. She put the car in park and turned to look at him. "The documents," she said. "I have them. All 3 sets." "Maya." "I'm checking." She held his gaze. The Financial Trail linking chairman dozed people to the false licensing claims against Davis Global. The witness statements from the 2 contractors pressured into signing fraudulent compliance reports. and the evidence connecting Do's operation to Kim Tae-sung's name being used without authorization. She paused. Because if Tae-sung did not authorize the use of his name against your mother's company, then he has been played by Do the same way my mother has, Haneul said. And a man like Tae-sung does not take that quietly. Maya looked at him. You're walking into the most dangerous meeting of your life to tell a mafia boss that someone used his name without permission. Yes. And your theory is that this makes him an ally. My theory is that it gives him a reason to listen before he makes a decision about me. He opened the car door. Everything after that depends on the conversation. Maya grabbed his arm. Not forcefully. Just her hand on his sleeve. He stopped. Come back, she said. Quietly. Not dramatically. Just the direct, unornamented request of someone who meant it completely. He looked at her hand on his sleeve. Then at her face. 1 hour, he said. He got out of the car and walked toward the building and did not look back because looking back was not something you did when you had already made the decision. Inside, Tae-sung's office was not what Haneul had expected. He had expected the architecture of intimidation, dark surfaces, deliberate coldness, the visual language of a man who wanted every visitor to feel small before they sat down. What he found instead was a room that was almost spare. A large desk. Bookshelves with actual books on them organized and read-looking. A single painting on the wall. Ink wash traditional. A mountain emerging from mist. The half-finished cup of cold tea. The 6 men against the walls, yes. But even they were still in a way that felt less like threat and more like furniture that had learned to breathe. Haneul sat in the chair across from Tae-sung. Tae-sung looked at him with the unhurried attention of a man who had spent decades reading people, and had learned that the first 30 seconds of stillness told him more than the first 30 minutes of conversation. You walked through my building, Tae-sung said. Yes. My people should have stopped you at the 3rd floor. They tried, Haneul said. I told them I had information about a breach of your name and your organization that you would want to hear before it became a problem you couldn't contain quietly. They made a call. Someone made a decision. He paused. I'm grateful for whoever that was. Tae-sung's eyes did not change. You came alone. Yes. Why? Because bringing lawyers or muscle to this meeting would have told you I was either threatening you or afraid of you. Haneul held his gaze. I'm neither. I came to have a conversation. Conversations don't need an audience. Tae-sung was quiet for a moment. He picked up the cold tea, looked at it, set it back down. Your mother, he said. Cece Davis. Yes. I know who she is. A pause. I know what she built. Davis Global has operated in Seoul for 7 years without once creating a problem for anyone in my world. He looked at Haneul carefully, which is why I was surprised when her name appeared in connection with a licensing dispute that had nothing to do with the kind of business she runs. It had nothing to do with her, Haneul said. The licensing dispute was manufactured. The compliance reports were signed under pressure by contractors who have since given written testimony. The entire structure was built by one person to force Davis Global into a legal corner that would require her to either sell a controlling stake or face regulatory action that would take 3 years, and everything she has to fight. He reached into his coat and placed a folder on the desk. His name is Chairman Do Kyung-il. Tae-sung looked at the folder. Did not touch it yet. Do, he said. He has been using your name, Haneul said. Not directly. Through a layer of intermediaries who have been implying, to city officials, to licensing boards, to 2 judges, that the pressure on Davis Global has your endorsement. He let that sit for exactly the right number of seconds. It doesn't. Because you didn't know about it. The room changed temperature. Not literally. But something in the quality of the air shifted. A pressure adjustment, subtle and total, like the moment before a very specific kind of weather arrives. Tae-sung's face did not move. But his eyes did something small and complete that made every man along the walls adjust their stillness by a fraction. You're telling me, Tae-sung said, his voice dropping to a register that was almost gentle, that Do Kyung-il has been conducting operations under my name, without my knowledge, without my authorization. Yes, Haneul said. And I can prove it. Everything in that folder is documented, time-stamped and sourced. My girlfriend is a legal specialist. She built the evidentiary chain herself. He paused. Do has been using you as a shield. If the licensing action against my mother succeeds, Davis Global's Yongsan development rights transfer to a holding company. That holding company has Do's fingerprints on it, and your name attached to it publicly. He held Taesung's gaze. When it unravels, and it will unravel, your name is the one attached to the fraud. Not his. Silence. The kind that was not empty. Taesung reached forward. Opened the folder. He read the way he did everything, without hurry, without visible reaction, with the total attention of someone for whom every detail was data. He read for 4 minutes. Haneul did not fill the silence. He sat and waited and let the document speak because that was what they were built to do. Taesung closed the folder. He looked at Haneul. How old are you? He said. 19. You built this in how long? 72 hours. My girlfriend built most of it. I found the initial thread. What thread? My mother's PA was a plant. Different situation resolved. But in pulling that thread I found a secondary connection. A city official who had received a payment routed through one of Do's shell structures 2 weeks before the first licensing complaint was filed against Davis Global. He paused. It took me 6 hours to trace the shell. Another 40 to build the full map. Taesung looked at him for a long moment. Your mother knows you're here? No. She would not have allowed it. Correct. And yet you came anyway. Haneul met his eyes. Someone has to. The quality of Taesung's attention shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Haneul had been trained by years of watching camera feeds and reading micro-expressions to catch the things that happen between the visible things. Something in Taesung's gaze moved from assessment to something that was not quite respect but was adjacent to it in a way that mattered. Do Kyung-il, Taesung said quietly, has been a problem I have been patient about for a long time. I know, Haneul said. I read everything I could find about your world before I walked into this building. Do has been operating in the spaces between legitimate business and your territory for 4 years, taking credit where it benefits him, attaching names that are not his to things that go wrong. He paused. My mother is not his first target. She is his most visible one. And you want my help. I want your testimony, Haneul said. Documented. Formal. That you did not authorize the use of your name or your organization's implied endorsement in any action against Davis Global. That the representations made to city officials and licensing boards were made without your knowledge. He held the man's gaze without blinking. That is all I am asking for. One document. Your signature. The truth of what you did and did not authorize. And in return? The folder stays between us. Do's use of your name goes into the legal record as unauthorized. Your organization's reputation is separated cleanly from whatever happens to him next. Haneul paused. You get a problem removed from your world without lifting anything except a pin. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Taesung stood. He walked to the window, Seoul below, the city laid out in its grid of light and movement, enormous and indifferent. He stood there for a moment with his hands behind his back and looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been watching for so long it has become part of how they think. Then he turned. Your mother, he said. Does she know what kind of son she has? Haneul said nothing. But something moved briefly in his face. I will give you the document, Taesung said. But I will give you something else as well. He returned to his desk. Saturday. Do has a meeting tomorrow morning. City Hall. He is presenting the final licensing recommendation against Davis Global to a panel of 3 officials. If that recommendation is accepted, the development rights transfer within 30 days, Haneul said. Yes. Taesung looked at him. I know 2 of those 3 officials. Personally, I will make 2 phone calls tonight. The recommendation will not be accepted. He paused. The 3rd official is Do's. Cannot move him. But 2 out of 3 is a failed vote. Haneul looked at him. Why? Because Do used my name, Taesung said simply. And I do not allow that. And because a 19-year-old boy walked into my building alone to protect his mother and sat in that chair without once looking at the door. He held Haneul's gaze. That deserves something. Haneul was quiet for a moment. Then he said. The document still matters. For the legal case. You'll have it within the hour. Haneul stood. straightened his coat, extended his hand across the desk. Tay-ang looked at the hand. Then he stood and took it. A brief, firm grip, the handshake of two people who had understood each other completely and had no further use for pretense. One more thing, Tay-ang said, releasing his hand. When this is over, and it will be over quickly now, tell your mother that Kim Tay-ang sends his respect. I'll tell her, Haneul said. He turned and walked toward the door. Haneul. He stopped, looked back. Tay-ang was already seated again, the folder open once more. His attention returned to the documents with the completeness of a man who had made his decision and moved on from it. Your girlfriend, he said without looking up. The one who built the evidentiary chain in 40 hours. A pause. Keep her. Haneul almost smiled. I intend to. He walked out. Maya was exactly where he had left her. Half a block away in the driver's seat, her phone in her hand, 3 windows open on her screen. She looked up when he opened the passenger door and got in. She read his face in under 2 seconds. Well, she said. He's making 2 phone calls tonight. The licensing vote fails tomorrow. He reached into his coat. And we have his formal testimony document arriving within the hour. Maya stared at him. He agreed. Kim Tay-ang. Maya. The Kim Tay-ang who has not. Yes, Haneul said. That one. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked forward through the windshield at the building half a block away. Dark glass and clean lines and the absolute silence of a place that announced nothing. What did you say to him? She asked. The truth, Haneul said. All of it. And he just. Doe used his name without permission. That was the key. He settled back in the seat. Nobody in his position tolerates that. I just gave him the documentation to act on it. He paused. And I think he respected that I came alone. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then. You could have led with that when I was trying to come with you. You would have come anyway. Obviously. She started the car. Now what? Now we go to my mother. He looked at his phone. A message already coming through from an unknown number. A scanned document. Tay-ang's testimony. Signed and sealed and delivered in 23 minutes. And we finished this. Maya pulled into traffic. Seoul absorbed them the way it absorbed everything, completely, immediately, without ceremony. She's going to be furious that you went alone, Maya said. I know. And then she's going to be proud. I know that too. The furious part comes first. Always does, Haneul said. Maya smiled, the real one, the one she didn't perform for rooms but kept for moments that had earned it. She drove. He watched the city. And between them the particular silence of 2 people who had just done something that could not be undone settled into something that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like peace. Cece Davis was in her home office when they arrived. She was in a meeting, virtual, her laptop open, 3 faces on the screen, her reading glasses on, a legal pad covered in her precise handwriting beside the keyboard. She was wearing a deep plum wrap dress with structured shoulders, her natural hair out in full gold earrings that caught the lamplight when she moved. She looked, as she always looked when she was working, like a woman who had decided somewhere early in her life that excellence was not an occasion, it was a baseline. She held up one finger when Haneul and Maya appeared in the doorway. 1 minute. They waited in the corridor. Maya leaned against the wall, her burgundy blazer still sharp despite the hours it had been on, her folio under her arm. She looked at Haneul. He was looking at his phone, the scanned testimony document open on his screen, reading it again with the focused attention of someone checking the integrity of a structure they had built and were about to put weight on. It holds, Maya said quietly. I know. I'm checking the seal. I checked the seal in the car. I'm checking it again. Haneul. She waited until he looked at her. It holds. He put the phone in his pocket. From inside the office, Cece's voice, measured, authoritative, wrapping up the meeting with the efficiency of a woman who did not extend conversations beyond their useful life. The laptop clicked shut. A pause. Then, come in. They came in. Cece took off her reading glasses and looked at her son. Then at Maya. Then back at her son. She did the reading she always did. The quick, total inventory of his face that she had been conducting since he was 3 years old, and she had learned that his face, unlike most people's, told the truth even when his mouth was being careful. What she read made her set her glasses down slowly. "Where were you?" she said. "Mom." "Haneul." Her voice was not loud. It was the voice she used when volume was unnecessary because the weight of it was already sufficient. "Where were you?" He sat down across from her desk. Maya took the chair beside him, opened her folio, and placed the printed testimony document on the desk without a word. Cece looked at the document. "Read the header. Read the name at the bottom." She was very still for a moment. Then she looked at her son. "You went to Kim Tae-sung," she said. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "You walked into that building." "Mom, read the document first." She looked at him for one more second, the look of a mother who had several things to say and was making the disciplined decision to sequence them correctly. Then she picked up the document and read it. She read it the way she read everything important, completely without rushing, giving each line its full weight. Maya watched her face. Haneul watched his hands. When Cece finished, she set the document down. She took off her reading glasses entirely and set them beside it. She looked at the middle distance for a moment, that place people look when they are processing something that has arrived in a form they did not anticipate. "Do Kyung-il," she said. "Yes," Haneul said. "He manufactured the licensing dispute. From the beginning. The first complaint was filed 14 days after a payment from his shell structure reached a city official. Maya traced the routing. He leaned forward. He's been building toward the Yongsan development rights for 18 months. Davis Global's stake in that development is the single most valuable asset you hold in Seoul right now. If the licensing action succeeded and you were forced to sell, the rights transfer to his holding company," Cece said. "Not a question. At a forced sale valuation, a fraction of market value." Haneul paused. He would have walked away with a $2 billion asset for less than $400 million. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the estate grounds were caught in the last of the afternoon light, the kind of golden, indifferent light that did not know or care what was being discussed inside the rooms it touched. "And Tae-sung's name," Cece said, "used without authorization, implied to officials and board members as endorsement. Do needed a layer of untouchability around the operation. Borrowing Tae-sung's name gave him that, as long as nobody checked." Haneul held his mother's gaze. "Nobody checked. Until now." Cece looked at the testimony document again. At the signature at the bottom, precise, unhurried, the signature of a man who did not write his name on things he did not mean. "He gave you this willingly," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because Do used his name. And because," Haneul paused, "I think he respected that I came alone." Cece looked at her son for a long layered moment. The kind of look that contained more history than it could express. 11 years of raising him, watching him grow into someone she recognized and someone she was still discovering, someone who had his father's precision and something entirely his own that she could not name but could always feel. Then she said, "You went to a meeting like that without telling me. You would have stopped me." "Yes, I would have." Her voice was even. "Because it was dangerous, Haneul. Because that building." "I know what that building is, Mom." He did not back down. Not aggressively, just with the steadiness she had inadvertently built into him by example. "I also knew that the licensing vote is tomorrow morning. That after tomorrow, contesting the rights transfer becomes a 3-year legal battle that costs you everything even if you win. And that the one thing that could stop it before it reached that point was in that room." He paused. "So I went." The silence between them was the complicated kind. The kind that held both the rightness and the wrongness of the same action simultaneously, and had no clean resolution. Maya, who had been quiet through all of it with the wisdom of someone who understood that some conversations needed witness but not participation, spoke for the first time. "He was never in danger," she said quietly. "I was outside the entire time with Detective Shin on standby, and a filed emergency motion that would have activated the moment he didn't come out." She looked at Cece. "He went in alone." "He was not alone." Cece looked at Maya. Something moved across her face. That thing that happened when Cece Davis encountered something that had been handled with a level of care and intelligence that met her own standard. "You filed before he went in," she said. "As a precaution." "Yes." "What motion?" Unlawful detention and coercion, preemptive. Maya's voice was matter of fact. It would have triggered an immediate police response to that location within 4 minutes of activation. I had Detective Shin's direct line open the entire time Haneul was inside. She paused. He had 4 minutes of risk. Maximum. Cece looked at her son, then at Maya, then back at the testimony document. Then she did something that surprised both of them. She laughed. Not a long laugh. Not a performative one. A short, compressed, genuine sound that escaped before she had decided to allow it. The laugh of a woman who had just understood something and found it, despite everything, worth laughing at. You planned a Mafia visit like a legal operation, she said. Everything is a legal operation if you structure it correctly, Maya said. Cece shook her head slowly. Then she looked at Haneul with the expression he had seen only a handful of times in his life, the one that lived in the territory between fury and pride and had no clean name for itself. We are going to discuss the fact that you walked into that building, she said. At length. Later. I know. But first. She picked up the testimony document and her phone simultaneously. I need to call Shin Ji-yeon. We file this tonight, we pair it with Maya's evidentiary chain on Do, and we have everything in the court system before that licensing panel convenes tomorrow morning. She was already dialing. Do walks into City Hall tomorrow thinking he has a vote. What he's going to find instead is that the vote is already gone, Haneul said. Tay-ang made 2 calls last night. 2 of the 3 panel officials will recuse themselves this morning citing undisclosed conflicts of interest. Cece's finger paused over her phone. She looked at him. He moved that fast. He was motivated. She studied her son for one more moment. Then she dialed. Shin Ji-yeon arrived at the Davis estate at 7 that evening. She came in a steel gray pantsuit and a focused expression, her briefcase already open before she sat down at the dining room table where Haneul and Maya had laid out the complete evidentiary structure in 3 organized sections: physical documentation, digital trail, and witness testimony, each one labeled indexed, and cross-referenced with the precision of people who understood that a case was only as strong as its organization. Shin looked at the table, then at Maya. You built this today, she said. The foundation was built over 72 hours, Maya said. Today was assembly. You're 19. Yes. Shin looked at the table again with the expression of a lawyer recalibrating. Then she sat down, opened her briefcase and got to work. For 2 hours the dining room was all documents and quiet conversation. Shin asking questions, Maya answering them with the precision of someone who had anticipated every question and prepared for it. Haneul filling gaps. Cece moving between the table and her phone with the controlled urgency of a woman managing 3 fronts simultaneously. At 9:15, Shin looked up from the last document. This is the cleanest evidence package I have seen in 11 years of practice, she said. The Tay-ang testimony alone changes the entire shape of Do's operation legally. He has been representing implied Mafia endorsement to officials. That is not a civil matter. She looked at Cece. That is criminal fraud. Coercion. Abuse of regulatory process. A pause. Do Kyung-il is not walking out of City Hall tomorrow. Cece set her phone down. File tonight. I'll file at midnight. Everything will be in the system before the panel convenes. Shin began gathering documents. I'll need a judge for an emergency injunction on the licensing action. Judge Eo, Maya said. She's on night rotation this week. Her clerk's direct number is in the contact sheet on the back of section 3. Shin found the sheet, looked at Maya with an expression that had given up recalibrating, and settled into something that was simply impressed. Are you planning to go to law school? Shin asked. I'm planning to run my own firm by 30, Maya said. Law school is a step. Call me when you graduate, Shin said. She stood, gathered her briefcase and looked at Cece. I'll confirm the filing by midnight. Have your phone on. Always, Cece said. Do Kyung-il arrived at City Hall at 8:52 the following morning. He was dressed for a conclusion, a charcoal double-breasted suit, a silk tie in deep burgundy, the presentation of a man who had engineered an outcome and come to collect it. He had his assistant beside him and 2 advisors behind him, and the particular stride of someone who had already written the next chapter in his head. He was shown to the conference room where the licensing panel convened. 2 of the 3 chairs were empty. The third official, Do's man, the one Tay-ang could not move, was already seated, looking at his phone with an expression that had been recalibrating since 6 that morning when the news had begun arriving in pieces, each one worse than the last. Do stopped in the doorway, looked at the 2 empty chairs, looked at his official. "Where are they?" he said. The official looked up. "Recused. Both of them. Filed simultaneously at 7 this morning. Undisclosed conflicts of interest." He paused. "The panel cannot convene without a quorum." "Reconvene it," Do said. "Appoint alternates." "There's something else." The official set his phone on the table and turned it toward Do. "A court filing. Timestamp 12:03 a.m. Emergency injunction." The names Davis Global, Do Kyung-il, and Kim Tae-sung all appearing in the same document, but not in the arrangement Do had spent 18 months constructing. In the opposite arrangement, Tae-sung's name in the testimony column, Do's name in the defendant column. Do looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. "Who filed this?" he said. His voice had lost its presentation quality. Something underneath it was showing. "A legal representative of Davis Global." The official paused. "The filing attorney of record is listed as Maya J. Carter." Do did not know the name. It meant nothing to him. He turned it over looking for the edge of it, the connection, the person behind it who had the resources and the reach to build this in the time frame it had been built in. He found nothing. Because he had never once thought to look at a 19-year-old girl. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. A number he recognized. One of the intermediaries he had used to imply Tae-sung's endorsement to officials over the past 18 months. He did not answer. It rang again. A different number. Another intermediary. Then his lawyer. He answered that one. Do. His lawyer's voice was the voice of someone delivering information they wished they did not have. "There are officers at your office. They have a warrant." A pause. "Criminal fraud. Regulatory coercion. And something called unauthorized representation of a third party's organizational authority." Another pause. "Do, who is Kim Tae-sung's attorney?" "Because he has filed a separate civil action against you personally that." Do ended the call. He stood in the doorway of the empty conference room in his double-breasted suit with his assistant and his advisors behind him and the 2 empty chairs in front of him, and understood, with the total clarity of a man who had spent 18 months building something and was watching it come apart in 18 hours, that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had looked at Cece Davis and seen a target. He had not looked at what was standing beside her. Cece was in her Davis Global office when Shin called. She was in a floor-length ivory wool dress with a structured belt, her gold jewelry back in place, her hair pinned and precise, dressed for a day she had known since midnight was going to end correctly but had refused to celebrate before it did. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did. Moving. Indifferent. Enormous. Her phone rang. She answered before the second ring. "Tell me," she said. "The panel couldn't convene," Shin said. And even through the phone her voice carried the particular satisfaction of a lawyer whose work has held 2 recusals. No quorum. "The licensing action against Davis Global is formally suspended pending judicial review of the fraud allegations." A pause. "And Do's office has been visited this morning. He is currently being asked to answer questions he does not have good answers for." Cece closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and looked at Seoul through her window. "The development rights," she said. "Intact. Fully. The injunction protects them through the review period, and the fraud finding will ultimately invalidate the entire licensing complaint." Shin paused. "Cece. It's done." She stood at her window for a moment. The city below moved and moved and moved the way it always had, the way it would after every version of this, after every person who had looked at what she built and decided it was something they could take. None of them had ever been right. "Thank you, Jiyeon," she said quietly. "Thank Maya," Shin said. "And whatever your son said to whoever he said it to." Cece almost smiled. "I'll pass that along." She ended the call. Stood at the window for one more moment. Then she picked up her phone and sent a single message to a number she had added to her contacts that morning. A number Haneul had given her with the explanation that it belonged to someone who deserved acknowledgement. The message was 5 words. Kim Tae-sung. Thank you. Davis. The response came 4 minutes later. 3 words. Your son. Remarkable. She looked at those 2 words for a moment. Then she put her phone in her pocket and picked up her bag and walked out of her office to find her son. They had dinner that evening, the 3 of them, the way they seemed to increasingly end their days together, as though the events kept selecting for this particular configuration. The restaurant was quiet and warm, a private corner table, the kind of place that understood what discretion was worth. Cece was in a deep sapphire evening dress, her diamonds back, her posture the posture of a woman who had won and was allowing herself, quietly and without performance, to know it. Haneul was in a navy suit, open collar, the tiredness of 72 hours finally showing around his eyes but his face carrying something settled. Maya was in a burnt orange silk dress, her locks down, her folio nowhere in sight for the second time in recent memory. They ordered. They ate. They talked the way people talk when the war is over and the table is safe. He said your son is remarkable, Cece said at one point, looking at Haneul. He looked up. Tae-sung. He texted it. Haneul was quiet for a moment. How do you have his number? You gave it to me this morning. I gave it to you for emergencies. I decided gratitude was an emergency. She picked up her glass. He deserves to know that what he did mattered. Haneul looked at his mother. This woman in her sapphire dress who had built an empire and raised a son and survived 11 years of a man trying to dismantle both, who had stood at her window this morning and looked at the city that had tried her and was still standing in it, still looking back at it, still entirely undefeated. Mom, he said. I need to say something. Then say it. He set down his fork. Looked at her directly. I know I scared you. Going to that building alone. I know it crossed a line that you would have drawn very clearly if I had asked you first. He paused. I didn't ask because I knew I had to go and I knew you'd stop me, and there wasn't time to find a third option. He held her gaze. But I should have found a way to tell you. Even after. I should have called you from the car before I went in. I didn't. And I'm sorry for that part. The table was quiet. Cece looked at her son. At the honesty in his face, not the managed kind, not the strategic kind, just the plain direct honesty of someone who had done something necessary and imperfect and was naming both parts of it without excuse. You have my instincts, she said finally. And his precision. That combination is going to make you extraordinary, and occasionally make me lose sleep. She picked up her glass. We are going to establish some ground rules. I know. Non-negotiable ones. I know, Mom. Starting with the cameras. The cameras are already down, he said. She looked at him. When? This morning. Before I came to the office. He looked at Maya briefly. Maya filed the appropriate disclosure and decommissioning documentation. Of course she did, Cece said. Maya looked at her water glass with great composure. Cece set down her glass and looked at them both. Her son in his navy suit with his settled face and his 72 hours of sleeplessness and his 19-year-old certainty that had just walked into a room that grown men avoided and walked back out with exactly what he had gone in for. And this girl beside him in her burnt orange silk, who had built an evidentiary case at midnight and filed a preemptive legal motion and had a forensic specialist and a detective on standby and had managed all of it with the calm of someone for whom excellence was, as it was for Cece, simply the baseline. She thought about what it meant that these two had found each other. That the world had arranged for her son to sit next to exactly this person in exactly the right room at exactly the right time. She thought about Kim Tae-sung's 3 words. Your son. Remarkable. She thought, he doesn't know the half of it. Maya, she said. Maya looked up. I have a position opening in Davis Global's Legal Strategy Division. It is a mentorship position. You would work directly under Shin Ji-yeon, while you complete your pre-law qualification. She held Maya's gaze. It is paid. It is real work. And it would give you access to the kind of cases that most lawyers don't see until they have been practicing for a decade. She paused. I am offering it to you because you have earned it entirely and not at all because you are my son's girlfriend. Those are separate facts. Maya was still for a moment. Then, I would need to review the terms. Of course. And confirm it doesn't create a conflict with my academic program. Already checked. It doesn't. Maya looked at her. You already checked. I called the registrar's office this afternoon. Maya was quiet for another moment. Then she looked at Haneul. He was looking at the table with an expression of profound neutrality that meant he had known about this and had said absolutely nothing. You knew, she said. I suggested it, he said. She decided. When did you suggest it? Yesterday. In the car. Before or after the Tay-ang meeting? Before. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Cece. Then back at Haneul. You went into that building, she said slowly, already knowing that regardless of how it went, you were going to ask your mother to offer me a position. I had faith in how it was going to go, he said. Haneul. Maya. He looked at her directly. You spent 3 days building a case that saved my mother's company. You filed motions at midnight. You had a forensic team at the house before sunrise. You stood outside that building with Detective Shin on one line, and a preemptive motion ready to file on the other. He paused. You deserve something that was already in motion before the outcome was confirmed. Because what you did didn't deserve to be conditional on whether I came back out. The table was quiet. Somewhere in the restaurant, soft music moved through the warm air. The city beyond the windows went about its evening, enormous and indifferent and entirely unaware of what had been settled inside this particular corner of it. Maya looked at Haneul for a long moment. The kind of looking that did not need an audience. Then she looked at Cece. I accept, she said. Subject to terms. Subject to terms, Cece confirmed. And for the third time in recent memory, Maya's real smile arrived. Unhurried, unperformed, belonging only to moments that had fully earned it. Later, much later, after the dinner and the car and the quiet of the estate settling around her, Cece stood at the window of her sitting room. The same window. The same grounds. The same city beyond the gates. But the house felt different tonight from how it had felt for a long time. Cleaner. Like something that had been displaced had been returned to its correct position, and the whole structure was breathing better for it. Haneul appeared in the doorway. He had changed. He was carrying 2 cups of tea. This was becoming, she realized, their language. Tea at the end of the hard days. The thing they did when words needed a reason to stay in the room a little longer. He crossed to the window, handed her a cup, stood beside her. They looked at the grounds together. It's quiet, he said. Yes. Good quiet. Very good quiet. She sipped her tea. Doe will be formally charged within the week. Shin is certain. She paused. His entire licensing structure collapses with the fraud finding. Every official he pressured is now a witness against him. And Tay-ang's civil action runs parallel, Haneul said. Doe has no clean exits. No. She looked at the grounds. He built 18 months of careful work and it came apart in 18 hours. He built it on a lie, Haneul said. Things built on lies have a structural problem. They hold until they don't, and when they don't partially. He sipped his tea. They come down completely. Cece looked at her son. This boy. This remarkable, impossible, camera installing, Mafia visiting, Maya Carter loving boy who had come from the most painful chapter of her life, and become its best sentence. I want you to promise me something, she said. Depends on the something. Haneul. Okay. What? The next time you decide to walk into a room that I would not let you walk into. She turned to face him. You tell me first. Not to ask permission. Just so I know. She held his gaze. So I'm not sitting in a meeting wondering why my son isn't answering his phone. He looked at her. You called. 3 times. While you were inside. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his face, not guilt exactly. Something more like the specific weight of understanding the cost your choices have on the people who love you. I'll tell you first, he said. I promise. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she put her arm around him the way she had when he was small, before he became someone who walked into buildings that grown men avoided. He leaned into it. Just slightly. Just enough. You scared me, she said quietly. Not as accusation. Just as the truth of it, set down plainly between them. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. She looked at the grounds. Just come home. Always, he said. Always, Mom. The estate was quiet around them. The city beyond the gates moved and moved, the way it always had, the way it always would, indifferent to any particular story happening inside any particular window. But inside this window on this night the story was simple. A mother who had built something worth protecting. A son who had decided, before he was old enough to understand the full cost of the decision, that protecting it was his. And somewhere in the city, in the morning that was already arranging itself beyond the dark, a future that neither of them could fully see yet, but that both of them in their different ways were already walking toward. Together. If this story held you from the first word and refused to release you until the last, you know exactly where you belong. At Black Silk Stories we tell the stories that live at the intersection of power and love, of loyalty and intelligence, of mothers who build empires and sons who guard them with everything they have. We tell stories where the girl with the legal folio is just as dangerous as the boy who walks into the room, where the most feared man in Seoul recognizes something worth respecting in a 19-year-old who came alone. These are Afro-Korean stories. They hit different because they are different. Subscribe to Black Silk Stories. Drop a comment. Tell us who you watch this for. Share it with someone who needs to see a black woman untouchable, a son unmovable, and a love story written in midnight legal motions and cups of tea at windows. Black Silk Stories.